What is up YouTube? I'm Royal, I'm rank 1 Wildrift, and these are the best beginner champions for each role. If you're just getting into Wildrift, or if you're looking to swap to a different role than your main, this video is gonna help you out a ton. Being the best beginner champion does not necessarily mean that the champion is easy to play. Each of these champions offer a distinct playstyle that introduces key aspects of the roles in Wildrift, making them perfect for beginners to understand the fundamentals of the game and their specific role. In easy to understand terms, playing these champions will help you improve faster. Starting off with the Baron lane, we of course have Garen. Garen is a strong and durable fighter who can both deal damage and tank a lot of damage. His main weakness is that he lacks any kind of crowd control other than one silence. His main goal is to stay in lane, using his health regeneration from his passive to sustain longer than his opponents. Garen shines in straightforward battles. Get close to your enemy, poke with his spin, and then all in when they're low with your ultimate. His ultimate lets him finish off low health enemies, so aim to build up your damage slowly before diving in. In teamfights, he's excellent at pressuring the backline and using his tankiness to take some hits while dishing out solid damage. Keep in mind that his ultimate is true damage, so don't be afraid to use it on the enemy tank so you can quickly take down the enemy tank and then your team can push forward in fights. Next up, we have Malphite. Malphite is a tank with one of the best engage abilities in the game, his ultimate. During the laning phase, you can poke down your opponents with your first ability while tanking their poke with your passive shield. In fights, Malphite is all about big moments. His ultimate knocks up multiple enemies, making him perfect for jumping into teamfights and disrupting the enemy team. Play patiently and wait for your opportunity to get a great engage and catch multiple opponents together. Lastly, in the Baron lane, we have Darius. Darius is a bruiser with high damage potential, thriving in close combat where he can stack his bleed effect on enemies. In lane, play aggressively whenever possible, and your goal is to go for extended trades where you can stack up your passive stacks and do massive damage. Your ultimate resets after killing an enemy, allowing you to easily get multiple enemies once you have your full stacks of your passive. In teamfights, focus on targets that are easy to reach and can't kite you, building up your stacks on one target, and when you have 5 stacks, look to get your passive on multiple enemies with your first ability and kill all of them with your ulti. Moving on to the jungle, starting off with the Xin Zhao. Xin Zhao is a pretty straightforward jungler focused on early aggression and high impact ganks and early game damage. In the early game, you want to be aggressive. Farm your jungle camps, and when they're down, look to catch enemies off guard and set up kills. In teamfights, your ultimate lets you push away threats and focus on a single high priority target while not receiving damage from ranged enemies. So make sure you're using it to dive deep, knock back other enemies, and isolate squishy targets. He's pretty easy to pick up, but demands a proactive playstyle, so make sure that you're utilizing his early game strength. Next up in the jungle, we have Amumu. Amumu is a tanky jungler with strong crowd control, making him perfect for initiating fights. Focus on farming in the early game, but once you reach level 5, look for opportunities to gank with your ultimate. Amumu's ultimate can stun multiple enemies at once, making it extremely valuable in teamfights, where he can lock down the entire enemy team and set up your allies for a big follow-up. Lastly, in the jungle, we have Nunu. Nunu is a supportive, objective-oriented and focused jungler with strong crowd control. His gameplay revolves around securing key objectives like Dragon and Baron because he has his first ability that allows him to pretty much have 2 smites and easily execute objectives. He can also use his first ability to quickly counter jungle the enemy jungle, so he's great at invading. In teamfights, Nunu can act as a tanky engage frontline with his massive snowball. His ultimate slows and damages nearby enemies, and it's perfect for disrupting teamfights and forcing the enemy team to back off so you have great zone control. Moving on the mid lane, first up we have Annie. Annie is a powerful burst mage with a pretty straightforward playstyle. In lane, focus on farming safely with your first ability and looking for opportunities to poke. Once you build up her stun, that's when you can go for an all-in combo, especially with your ultimate. Summon, Tibbers to deal huge amounts of damage. Annie's simple combo makes her a perfect beginner-friendly option to learn how to take out squishy targets quickly. In teamfights, your job is to catch enemies off guard with your huge burst damage, so look for flash ultimates on the enemy backline. Next up, we have Morgana. Morgana is a control mage with high utility and crowd control. In lane, all you want to do is sit back and use your second ability to easily clear the wave while remaining super safe and scaling for the late game. Your first ability is perfect for catching enemies off guard. It's a very long duration route that also has very high range. You can easily catch enemies off guard for your team to follow up. Your ultimate can stun multiple enemies if you're close to them, so make sure to use that when the enemies dive deep into your backline. Lastly, your third ability is very impactful. You want to be using it right before crowd control hits you or your team to pretty much negate that crowd control and possibly win teamfights just because of this spell. A great example is Malphite is ulting in, initiating on your carry, you spell shield them, they don't get knocked up, and you win the fight. Lastly, in the mid lane, we have an assassin, and that's Diana. Diana is a close range assassin with strong burst damage and excellent mobility that you pretty much only go forward. She doesn't really have an escape. In lane, you want to poke with your first ability until you find a good chance to dive into the enemy. Your ultimate is amazing at teamfights because you can pull in multiple targets and put your passive on multiple targets, allowing you to dash around and clean up. Diana's playstyle is highly aggressive, focus on diving in the enemy backline and eliminating high priority enemies. Keep in mind, it's hard for Diana to escape once she goes in, so pick your engages carefully. Moving on to the dragon lane and some ADC marksman champions. First up, we have Miss Fortune. Miss Fortune is an ADC with high damage potential and strong poke. In the laning phase, you can utilize your first ability to bounce it off minions and keep doing a lot of damage from a very safe distance. Your ultimate is especially powerful in teamfights as it deals massive AoE damage when enemies are grouped up. Position carefully since you don't really have an escape, stay in the backline, and during fights unleash your ultimate. Next up we have Ashe. Ashe is a utility focused ADC with very strong crowd control. In lane, you want to poke with your second ability while keeping your distance. You can use your slow from your passive to kite enemies when they get near you. Your ultimate is one of the best initiation spells in the game, so when you find enemies caught out even across the map, you can launch your ultimate and pick up some easy kills for your team. Ashe is also really good at kiting. You can use your slows to keep melee threats away while positioning safely. In teamfights, your role is to apply crowd control with your passive and your ultimate and focus on dealing consistent damage, providing both utility and damage from the backline. Lastly, we have a hyper carry, and that's Xayah. Xayah is a quite mobile ADC with strong AoE damage because of her feathers and very good self-peel because of her ultimate. In lane, you want to focus on setting up your feathers behind the enemies so you can pull them back in with your third ability and deal massive damage. Xayah excels in fights where the enemies are running into her. She can set up her feathers and then get massive damage and root multiple enemies when the enemies run into her, and she can kite back. So focus on positioning carefully. Now let's move on to supports. First up we have Janna. Janna is a support focused on shielding and protecting your team and particularly your ADC. In the laning phase, you can play relatively safe, try to poke enemies from a distance and win trades with your shield. Your knock-up is a great ability to disengage when enemies get too close, and if they get close again, you can use your ultimate to push them back again and heal your allies in the process. Positioning on Janna is crucial. You need to stay near your ADC and be ready to shield them and knock up enemies that are coming for them to protect them. You don't want to stay too far back as to not be useful, but you don't want to be too far forward as to get focused by the enemy team. Janna's playstyle is all about supporting from the backline, offering a lot of crowd control and utility to your team. Next up we have Leona. Leona is a tanky, aggressive support who excels at initiating fights. In the laning phase, you're all about getting close to your enemies and locking them down. Aim to get on top of the enemy ADC and look for an all-in. Leona is amazing at catching out mispositioned enemies and punishing mistakes. In teamfights, Leona can dive deep in the enemy backline and focus high priority targets. However, you can also use her to crowd control the enemy frontline for your ADC to easily pick them off. And lastly, we have Braum. Braum is a protective support with a focus on shielding allies and blocking enemy attacks. In lane, your primary role is to shield your ADC and keep them safe from poke and all-ins. Braum is absolutely insane at protecting your team from engages, and that should be your main role. Use your shield to block the initial engage from the enemy team, and then using your stun and your ultimate, you can lock down enemies for your carries to finish them off. With Braum, your positioning is key. Stay close to your carries and be ready to jump in and block damage for them and stun the enemy team. So these are my picks for the best beginner champions in Wild Rift to help you learn the game faster. If you disagree with any of my picks or you have some other picks that you want to mention, please do so in the comments and down below. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please drop a like and subscribe for more Wild Rift content.